Yes, folks, Aborigines can't be deported from Australia, even if they're not born in Australia, even if they don't have Australian citizenship. Yes, Aborigines are now a special class of people, above the law of the land, above everyone else. But first I want to talk about another group of people who are being groomed by our dear leader Jacinda Ardern to be a special class of people here in New Zealand. And these people don't even have any affiliation to New Zealand, and nor do they intend to. They don't assimilate at all. Quite the opposite. We must assimilate to them. Have a look.
One News can reveal a study is underway into the ongoing psychological and physical effects on Christchurch's Muslim community following the mosque attacks last year.
The move comes amid fears many of those affected aren't getting the support they need. Jordan Opines with this exclusive report.
A community still reeling nearly 12 months on from unimaginable horror. March 15, the day 51 Muslims were killed and many more injured when a gunman opened fire inside two Christchurch mosques.
We do hear anecdotally about people who may be still in their homes who are too scared to come out. We're hearing a lot of reports of people who don't want to return to the mosque because they're concerned after what happened there.
Now a dedicated team of health professionals, government funded by the Health Research Council,
Funded by the taxpayer.
will work to identify and track ongoing issues in the wake of the terror attacks.
Yeah, now this study is happening in New Zealand, so why is she writing in Arabic? Yeah, that's right. They don't have any intention of assimilating, and they're not even required to.
You know, the immigration issues, financial issues, family issues, the whole change to life this has resulted in.
You know, we're identifying some of the issues in the wider Muslim community. It will help to build a resource for Muslim mental health, both in Christchurch but also around the country.
Over the next 12 months, the Muslim-led team want to interview as many as possible of those who were present in the mosques and the families of those who died. But participation is completely voluntary.
We've talked to both of the imams. They very much endorse the study.
Well, of course they would. They can milk money out of it and become a special class of people.
They understand the need for something like this. They see it themselves.
The Christchurch Muslim community is incredibly diverse, made up of 40 different ethnic groups.
40 different tribes.
The government-funded research, which will be printed in 7 languages, also aims to identify any cultural barriers that may be preventing people from asking for help.
What we can do that is culturally appropriate in terms of providing the appropriate needs. So how do we best do that?
Yeah, so in other words, how do we best change our culture to fit theirs?
This group of people in a respectful way, in a way that we recognise some of their unique difficulties.
They hope to report their findings by the end of next year to help the community that's still struggling. Jordan Opines, One News.
Anyway, now to the Aborigine story.
But it's something that you should panic about. Today, the High Court ruled that people who identify as Aboriginal now have one right that people of any other race do not. No one calling themselves Aboriginal can now be expelled by the government from Australia, even if they're born overseas, even if they aren't Australian citizens, and even if they're criminals. Now this is extraordinary, so extraordinary in fact that judges who were outvoted in this 4-3 decision, including the Chief Justice, protested strongly against this racial division and asked, where did this new law come from? This case started when Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton tried to deport 2 foreign citizens who'd been jailed for more than a year for violent crimes. One was Brendan Thomas. He is a New Zealand citizen, not Australian. He was born in New Zealand to a New Zealand father, an Australian mother who has some Aboriginal ancestors. But Tom's has lived most of his life in Australia, identifies as Aboriginal and is accepted as Aboriginal by members of the Gungari people. The other man in this case is Daniel Love. He is a citizen of Papua New Guinea who was born there to parents who were both born there too. But his father's great-grandparents had Aboriginal ancestors, and Love, who has lived most of his life here, identifies as Aboriginal. And, he says, is accepted as Aboriginal by one elder. Now, their lawyers, backed by the Victorian Labor government, warning, said, how can the federal government expel such Aborigines from Australia? And the High Court has now agreed the government can't expel them. Well, can't expel one. The other one, from New Guinea, they're not sure if it's Aboriginal. Another court has got to decide that. Now, they decided this in a vote of 4-3, and it was a very bitterly divided vote, as you will see. Now, Brendan Thomas, they agreed, was Aboriginal. He has been released before. He can't be expelled. Now, the reasons the majority judges gave for saying no Aborigines can ever be treated as an alien and deported seem to me extraordinary. For a start, it is based on treating people who are before the court not as individuals, but as members of some race, sharing some supposed similarities common to them all. Justice Michelle Gordon, for instance, in her judgment, wrote floridly about how Aboriginal Australians are not outsiders or foreigners. They are descendants of the first peoples of this country, the original inhabitants, and they are recognised as such. And she said they have a unique connections to this country with the land or waters under...
Did you get that? They have a unique connection to this country with the land or waters. Does that sound familiar, folks? Yes, Maori will now want the same. Now, how many Maori no longer have New Zealand citizenship? And just how many would like to come back around pension time, for example? Now, there must be thousands of Maori now who are no longer New Zealand citizens. Think about that.
Indigenous laws and customs, which is recognised under Australian law. And she said it was a connection that was spiritual or metaphysical. They can't be treated as aliens, therefore, and deported. I wonder whether these connections, these spiritual connections, these deep connections and love of the land are actually shared by Tom's and the other guy. I mean, how do we know? Love and Tom's have all that because they have some Aboriginal ancestors way back, and therefore, I mean, how does this work? And does not a single white person have some sort of spiritual connection? You know, maybe great-great-great-grandparents settle that land and, you know, it's crazy. This race-based thinking, to me, is shocking. And guess what? This decision cannot now be overturned by Parliament. This is the law. So I'm not surprised that, okay, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson immediately got her back up.
I don't see why they shouldn't have to get a passport, because a lot of people now, how much Indigenous blood do they have? So I think everyone should be treated equally.
Well, of course they should.
In this land, whether you're Aboriginal or a migrant, if you require a passport, everyone must apply for a passport.
Okay, that's just Pauline Hanson. Some people will say, that's just Hanson, forget that. All right. How about the fact that this decision worries the Chief Justice herself? Susan Kiefel was one of the three that were outvoted. She warned, in her dissenting judgment, she warned that this kind of legal thinking meant Aboriginal elders now have the power to decide who exactly was a non-alien and couldn't be deported by the federal government. And she said that to accept this effect would be to attribute to the Indigenous group the kind of sovereignty which was in fact implicitly rejected by the High Court's famous Mabo decision, which you might recall said yes to land rights, but emphasised that this was under Australian law. You couldn't be beyond Australian law, unlike this decision. This decision, as the Chief Justice is suggesting, brings us closer to having people who identify as Aboriginal having the right to effectively run their own race-based governments or do things that are beyond Australian law because they say, we're Aboriginal. That, to me, is a form of racial division that can lead only to tremendous division and strife. And again, I'm not alone in being appalled here. Another one of the judges who was outvoted, Stephen Gageler, he wrote a fierce protest. Morally, this was wrong. And not just morally, there was nothing in the Constitution, he said, that could justify this decision. Nothing there to let judges limit the powers of our elected government over members of just one race. In legal terms, as he put it, nor can I be party to a process of constitutional interpretation or constitutional implication which would result in the inference of a race-based constitutional limitation on legislative power. My objection, he said, is one of principle to the judicial creation of any race-based constitutional distinction, irrespective of how benign the particular distinction contended for might seem. Judges making the law up, judging by the vibe and creating race-based differences.
Yes, divide, divide, divide. That's all these radical socialists understand. Now just think about that High Court ruling for a moment in respect to borders around the world. If Aborigines can't be deported from Australia, then surely if equality truly existed in this world, then millions of white Australians and white New Zealanders can't be deported from the UK and Ireland either.